We once again find Jesus under assault as he deals with the challenges and questions of the religious establishment of his day. An establishment he clearly threatened deeply. This particular encounter involves the Sadducees. It's actually the only instance in Luke's gospel that the Sadducees are mentioned, though they were among Jesus' adversaries. There were several sects in Judaism at the time of Christ. We know most readily the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and we have heard about the Essenes, but there were others. Of all of them, these were powerful, temple-centered, religious conservatives who sought societal stability and hated any disruption of their well-established rituals and routine. You can imagine how disturbing Jesus and his movement was to them. In addition to that, they took as their holy text only the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, and nothing beyond that. On the other hand, the Pharisees included the Psalms and the prophets as their scriptures, so they were already exposed to messianic language and expectations in a way that the Sadducees spurned. The Sadducees did not accept angels or a spirit world, and they did not believe in any life after death or resurrection. So knowing all of that, the impertinence of their questioning of Jesus is pretty obvious. I mean, if they don't believe about resurrection, why are they talking about heaven? They paint an instance of a wife in heaven who had been married to 7 brothers in turn, because the one she was married to each time had died. She must have been a tired woman. Wow. You see, Jewish practice said that a brother was responsible for marrying his brother's wife in order to protect her and the family's property from destitution and ruin. So the Sadducees smugly present this problem to Jesus, quite sure that they were going to stump him. Whose wife is she in heaven if she has been married to all the brothers in life? In effect, Jesus tells them that they're asking the wrong question, and that marriage is for procreation in this life and ceases to be relevant to our lives as children of God, lived like the angels who never die. And using the very Torah that they treasure, he refers to the God that Moses encountered in the burning bush, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He points out to them that they are all alive to God, even though their earthly pilgrimage is past. The Sadducees are trumped and fail to diminish Jesus with their little ploy. I can't help it. It's going in and out, right? Yeah. It's not me. At my age, I'm never sure, but I'm pretty sure it's not me. I suspect that Jesus' answer does perhaps raise some questions for us, as Christians who long to see again our spouse, perhaps, family members, or even on this Remembrance Day, those who gave their lives for our freedom. Heaven seems very different than our lives here and now. I think it's my battery. I want to assure you, certainly the ones that we have known and loved, but not in the same way. The truth is that we just don't know much about the shape of our future with God. What is it like to be as an angel, for instance? What do the children of God really experience? While these may be healthy and intriguing questions, it's important today because I think addresses some of this confusion and concern about death and life after. It's a story that Lou told me, and I want to tell you a bit about our journey together. Lou had been a parish secretary 2 ministers before I'd arrived, and although she'd basically retired, she did understand my job and the pressures that went with it. Lou's home was the place I went when I needed support and understanding. There was always a cup of tea with a large dose of listening and encouraging fellowship. One of the early deficits I identified in my own bag of pastoral gifts was the lack of personal experience with death. Although I'm experiencing a dead microphone. Apart from tragically losing a dog when I was 14, I'd never lost someone close. Although the loss of that dog actually bore eerily similar qualities to losses I've experienced since. As I dealt with deaths in the community, I decided to ask Lou for help. She had been widowed suddenly many years before as a young woman and was living out her days on her own. I went to see her with my problem and asked her to tell me about death and the experience she had when her young husband had died. She told me of her utter devastation at his loss, the helplessness and depression. This was not the Lou I knew, and so I asked her what had helped her. Her answer was to describe an experience that, to this day, I cannot explain or place in theological categories. And it's not normal either for those who have loss. So don't any of you say, that wasn't the way for me. Is there something wrong with me? That's not what the story is about. It's unlikely, in fact, that any of us here this morning have had such an experience. She said that one night, not long after her husband's death, he appeared at the end of her bed and told her to come with him. She went with him to a car in which her mother was sitting in the back seat. As they drove eventually quite far, and then they came to a hilltop overlooking what Lou described as an unspeakably beautiful place, a valley. And she and her husband got out of the car. He told her, "This is where we are, and that you mustn't worry anymore about us." That they were just fine in this beautiful place. Then he said he needed to take her back home. She, of course, refused to leave. Lou was fairly stubborn. But he finally convinced her there was no choice and that this was not her time. As she put it to me, she woke the next morning essentially healed from her grief and wasn't disabled by it ever again. Lou gave me permission to tell this story whenever it may be helpful, but I still don't fully understand it. Our journey together continued. A couple of years later, Lou took me aside briefly at church on Sunday. She just tugged on my vestments and asked if I'd drop by. Of course, I did just that. When I asked her what was wrong, she said to me, "I'm afraid of dying." Not really knowing how to help with that, I asked her to tell me again the story of her encounter with her dead husband. And as she retold that story, I saw her relief growing and her healing taking hold. I still couldn't find any theological validation for her story, but I sure couldn't deny its effect. Lou fought recurring cancer a number of times, and my visits to her seemed to be more likely in the hospital than anywhere else. Some years later, she was once more in hospital, but in a more extreme condition. I remember vividly my last visit with her there. She was a rabid fan of the Blue Jays baseball team. I mean rabid. So our personal liturgy always involved an initial catch-up on the team's current performance. Knowing her death was soon, I eventually asked her quietly if she was afraid. We both knew what I asked. And her answer was a brisk, a little. And then she immediately asked me to rub her neck. That was our last conversation. She died a few hours later. I still miss her. When we reflect on death, our own deaths, I suppose, I wonder what Lou's experience might mean for us. I think it's true that death is a mystery, and that like anything unclear, it leaves us unsure of the reality of the experience. We don't know what that moment will hold for us. But Christians at least need to be as clear as we're able to be about the destination we have before us. Fear is all facing death, but it's a fear that is coded with hope and confidence. That is what Lou taught me. Even if my theological categories fail me when I try to explain her experiences. This is something the Sadducees were just unable to contemplate. It was totally foreign to them. But of course, Jesus knew what his destiny was to be. He knew resurrection would restore him to the side of his Father and open up for all his followers a future that glowed with the presence of God. You and I share that future as well. We may not know its shape very completely. It is, after all, beyond our capacity. But we look forward with the full expression of Easter hope and celebration. Let's not be like the Sadducees in our limited perception. Let's risk imagining a future that Jesus promised and lived out himself. Let's